So today we're going to start chapter 12 on blood. Kind of my plan was February, get through blood and do the heart during Valentine's Day. We might be a little bit behind for the heart on Valentine's Day, but we will be in at least the right system for it. So today we're going to start with blood. Blood is your, basically your system that carries everything everywhere. It's the transportation system. So it's considered a type of connective tissue. We talked about that earlier in the year. It's connective because it does carry stuff from one area to another. It's a mixture of cells, chemicals, electrolytes, fluid, water. It transports substances throughout your body. It's very important. Temperature, stable internal environment, homeostasis, keeps things the way they're supposed to be. Distribution of heat, which is why your face gets red when you're hot, the blood vessels are expanding. So very, very important system. What is included in your blood? We'll look at red blood cells, white blood cells, plasma, and platelets. And today we'll pretty much focus on the cell part of it for the most part. And after saying that, the first thing that we'll talk about is plasma, which is more of the liquid part. Blood volume, which is something you can see on when you have lab tests done. Plasma is mostly water. It also contains amino acids, proteins, carbohydrates, lipids, your cholesterol. When they check your cholesterol, your lipids are found inside of the plasma. Vitamins, electrolytes are in the plasma, so your sodium ions, your potassium ions. A blood hematocrit is typically 45% cells, and most of those cells are red blood cells. Red blood cells are the most common, and then 55% plasma. So when you take a hematocrit and they actually centrifuge and spin a blood sample, your plasma will have kind of like a yellowish color, and a little over half will be your plasma. Average sized adult has a blood volume of about 5 liters. So a couple of 2-liter bottles and then a part of another one. So when you bleed, and that's another thing, you know, like when you cut yourself, especially on the head, and it looks like you're losing a lot of blood, typically it looks worse than it is. When you donate, you typically donate a pint of blood. Blood tests, when they run blood tests, how many of you have had this done before where they've drawn blood for something? Okay, typically what they do then is like I said, they'll centrifuge it, and this is what happens. Your red blood cells are bigger, they're going to sink to the bottom. White blood cells and platelets, look how small that portion is. There are very few white blood cells unless something's abnormal. And then plasma is the largest portion. You can also just donate plasma at certain centers.
That's what they wanted me to do, and I was like, yeah, okay now.
In Sioux Falls, I know they used to pay you to donate plasma. So if we look at the chart, I do like this. Everything that makes up your blood, 45% are formed objects or elements. Platelets, blood clotting. Red blood cells, notice that, 95%. White blood cells, 0.1, that's the least. And then when I look at white blood cells, we'll actually spread these out and talk about the different types as we go and what they're responsible for. For example, eosinophils, if you have allergies, you're going to have a higher percentage of those. Neutrophils are one of the main ones they look for. If you have an infection, that number will go up. And then in the plasma, electrolytes, we kind of talked about those already. The gases that are carried also in your plasma. So, specifically looking at the blood cells. Red blood cell, scientific name is erythrocytes. Donut-shaped is often what they're called. Biconcave, which means they kind of sink in the center. And one of their main jobs is to carry oxygen. And hemoglobin is the part of your blood that's responsible for carrying oxygen. When oxygen combines with hemoglobin, so when hemoglobin picks up oxygen, it becomes bright red and it's called oxyhemoglobin. Deoxygenated blood is called deoxyhemoglobin, and it is darker. So when you look at pictures, all diagrams that we have, your arteries are red because they have oxygen in them. Your veins are blue because they're deoxygenated. Your blood is not really blue, and it even kind of looks like it with your veins, but that's just the skin that kind of discolors it. Your blood is really a bright red, and then if it doesn't have oxygen in it, it's just more of a darker red. It's not, you don't actually have blue blood inside of your veins. Red blood cells, this is interesting. Red blood cells, when they are adults, they discard their nuclei or they absorb their nuclei. They don't have them as they age. So red blood cells cannot reproduce. You have to produce new red blood cells constantly. They do not split and form new ones. So they can't reproduce, and they don't produce any proteins without the DNA inside of them. Red blood cells can produce some ATP through glycolysis, and because they can't use the oxygen, they don't have any mitochondria. Not a huge amount of ATP, and there's an actual what they look like. So biconcave, they're called donut shaped because they are round and they sink in the middle. So that would be what, this would be an actual, under a microscope, what your red blood cells would look like. Counts, we will look at some of these. Typical red blood cell count, this is an average, 4.7 million to 6.1 million cells per millimeter cubed. On your root, that's that tiny little line about the width of your fingernail. So huge, huge amounts. The first one was males. Females is a little bit lower, but there again, we're looking at a tiny amount of blood and millions of red blood cells. The number of red blood cells is important for how much oxygen you carry. Yep.
So why is it different for males and females?
Typically, males have more blood. They produce more blood. Part of it deals with your bone structure and your muscles. Men have, on average, have more muscle mass than females, so they need more red blood cells and more blood. In the embryo and fetus, red blood cells, erythropoiesis is the name of producing new red blood cells. So whenever you see erythro, that means red blood. It occurs in the yolk sac, liver, spleen. After birth and until now, as you guys sit there, it's produced in the red bone marrow. So your red bone marrow is what produces your red blood cells. Average lifespan is about 120 days, so your red blood cells don't live all that long. However, when we're talking about skin cells and things like that, I'd say it's in the middle as far as lifespan of most cells. Stages of red blood cell formation from hematopoiesis or hematopoietic stem cells is on the diagram that we're going to look at. So what you'll see is that all, oh, that's not the one that I wanted. There's a better diagram. All blood cells start from stem cells, and then they will differentiate into red blood cells, white blood cells. So they go through a different stage, and there is a better slide that we'll get to. Total number of red blood cells should remain pretty constant, homeostasis, negative feedback. For some reason, if there's a loss of blood, if you donate blood and lose red blood cells, the hormone erythropoietin is going to be released, and you're going to produce more red blood cells. Excessive increase in red blood cells is called polycythemia, which causes very viscous, thick, slow-moving blood. So you don't want too many red blood cells, and that's not very common. Here just shows the negative feedback. So low blood, or low oxygen, you're gonna notice that in your liver and kidneys. So basically they are the regulators, they're gonna pick up whether you're low on red blood cells or low on oxygen. And then if you are, it's going to stimulate more production of erythropoietin, which will stimulate more production of red blood cells. Dietary things that affect it. Iron, last blood drive, and doesn't happen very often, but my iron was low for some reason. More common also in females because we don't produce as many red blood cells. So iron is very important for producing synthesis of hemoglobin. Most iron comes from recycled old blood cells. Vitamins, vitamin B12, folic acid are both very important as far as producing more red blood cells. And any deficiency then is called anemia. So iron deficiency, when you go to donate blood, they want your iron level pretty high. And the last time I donated, mine was a little bit low, which hasn't happened since I was probably in my 20s. So I don't know if I was run down or catching something. But typically, you know, when you donate, they want that iron very high because you do need to replenish those blood cells. Actual anemia would be a lower iron, and if you're anemic, sometimes it will lead to being tired and things like that. Destruction of red blood cells, you don't want old red blood cells. That's why their lifespan isn't all that long. As they age, so this isn't human age, this is the age of the cells. As the cells get older, they become more fragile, they're easier to damage, so then when they squeeze through capillaries, they aren't as strong. Macrophages in the liver and spleen are going to phagocytize, they're going to eat up, cell eating, they're going to get rid of those red blood cells. So your liver and spleen are very important for getting rid of old, damaged red blood cells. Hemoglobin then is actually then broken apart into heme and globin, and that's where its name comes from. So when hemoglobin is decomposed, it's actually broken into smaller chemicals. Heme then will be decomposed into iron, which will be important for your blood count. And it can be converted into biliverdin and bilirubin, which are excreted in bile. These will be found in a typical blood cell count. And some of these, if you've ever had seen babies that kind of have that orangish color, and I'm drawing a blank, there's a name for it. Jaundice. Thank you, jaundice. Babies that are jaundice will have too much of this bilirubin. Their liver's not breaking it down fast enough, and that's fairly common in infants. As adults, you shouldn't have that happen, but you may notice people who have like liver issues or kidney issues, their skin might kind of have an orangish, greenish, almost kind of tint to it. And someone even who has very severe like alcoholism, sometimes you can see that. What was that, Leah?
Does it make your eyes yellow too?
Yes, it can make your eyes actually kind of an orangish color too. Yep, the white of your eye. And then the globin part is broken into amino acids and then will be reused. Here is just a diagram that shows the process of where everything happens. Liver, like I said, your liver is very important for breaking these down, and that's why it's more common in infants. Their liver is just getting going, it's just starting to work, so jaundice is more common in infants than it is in adults. And I'm going to stop there for right now.